23.3 is about stems. All of these foods are examples of stems. Stems vary in size, shape, and how they develop. Potatoes are actually underground. Above ground stems do lots of things for the plant. They produce leaves, branches, and flowers. They hold the leaves up to the sun, and most importantly, arguably, they transport the substances throughout the plant. Water up from the roots and carbohydrates down from the leaves. So it's a water and mineral transport system. Xylem and phloem form tubes, vascular bundles, vascular tissues that circulate water and nutrients and other compounds throughout the plant. Sometimes stems function as storage and help, and if the stems are green, obviously they contain chlorophyll and chloroplasts and they help with photosynthesis. Cacti have thick green stems that carry out photosynthesis and store water. Just like all the other parts of the plant, there are 3 types of tissue in the stem: dermal, vascular, and ground tissue. Stems have an epidermis on the outside with thick cell walls, and the waxy protective coating is called a cuticle. Protects against drying. You can see the difference between a monocot and a dicot stem. You can see the dermal, the vascular, and the ground tissue. With monocots, the vascular bundles are kind of scattered throughout, as you can see here. With a dicot, the vascular bundles are arranged in a ring. So that's one of those differences that we were talking about the other day. Stems have nodes where the leaves are attached. And then buds are found. They contain apical meristems that can produce new stems and leaves. In larger plants, stems produce wood that help support leaves and flowers. We'll get into that in a little bit. As I already mentioned, in monocots, the vascular bundles are scattered, and in dicots, the vascular bundles are arranged in a cylinder or in a ring. You can see a little bit more here, more detail about the monocot. The vascular bundles are scattered. And then the ground tissue around it, pretty similar, consisting of parenchyma. In dicots, the vascular bundles are arranged in a ring-like pattern. The parenchyma cells in the middle of that ring are called pith. Growth of stems is interesting. They're general patterns that produce the characteristic size and shape of the adult plant. So first of all, primary growth happens at the apical meristem. Produces new cells, and in this case, increased length. Secondary growth is when stems increase in thickness. So you can see that in the diagram below. Secondary growth is common among dicots and non-flowering seed plants such as pines, but it's rare in monocots. So most monocots don't grow thick stems. Most dicots have meristems within their stems and roots that can produce true secondary growth. This allows them to grow taller because the increase in width supports the extra weight of a bigger plant. Let's get into a little bit of detail about the secondary growth. There are 2 different meristems that create secondary growth. The first is called the vascular cambium. This produces vascular tissues. Remember, the vascular tissues are the xylem and the phloem, and it increases the thickness of the stems over time. Then we have the cork cambium that produces the outer covering of the stems, which is tree bark. So you see here, the vascular cambium is between the xylem and the phloem of the vascular bundles, right here. So it tacks on xylem cells toward the center of the stem and phloem cells toward the outside. And then we see the cork cambium right here towards the outside of the stem that produces bark. So the vascular cambium is a thin cylindrical layer of cells between the xylem and the phloem of each vascular bundle. The cell division in the vascular cambium gives rise to new layers. So the cambium continues to produce new layers of vascular tissue, causing the stem to become thicker. So that's what you see in this area right here. What we call wood is actually xylem produced by the vascular cambium. As woody stems grow thicker, the older xylem near the center of the stem no longer conducts water and becomes what we call heartwood. It darkens with age because it accumulates colored deposits. So that's in the middle. This is the heartwood that's in color right here in the center of the stem. Around the heartwood is sapwood. It's still active in transporting water, and it's lighter in color. So that's what you see highlighted here. So what you see when you look at a tree stump, a cross-section of a stem of a tree trunk, you see these rings. When growth begins in the spring, the vascular cambium begins to grow rapidly. There are large xylem cells resulting in a light-colored layer of early wood. There's lots of water. Think about what's going on right now. There's tons of rain, snow melting, lots and lots and lots of water. So the xylem cells are big. As time goes on, during the summer, sometimes there's a drought. Definitely there's less precipitation in the summer, so smaller xylem cells are formed, and they have thicker cell walls. So that's a darker layer of what we call late wood. This alternation of dark and light is what we call tree rings. So every season you see this alternation, and so that's why you can count the tree rings to determine how old a tree is. Each ring has a light wood at one edge and dark wood at the other, so there's a boundary. And like I just said, a ring usually corresponds to a year of growth. You can estimate a tree's age. The size of the rings can provide information about weather conditions. Thick rings indicate that there was a lot of growth, a lot of large xylem cells. Thin rings indicate a drought condition, a less favorable condition. And then we have the outer covering, the bark. All the tissues outside the vascular cambium make up bark. This includes phloem, cork cambium, and cork. And it's a relatively thin layer at the outside of the stem. The oldest tissues kind of split and fragment as the tree expands. The cork cambium surrounds the cortex, produces a thick protective layer of waterproof cork that prevents water loss. As the stem increases, outer layers of dead bark can crack and flake off. And that's your overview of stems.